Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
And my name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
This is the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast.
On this podcast, we'll be talking about various creativity topics and how they relate to the field of education.
We'll be talking with scholars, educators, and resident experts about their work, challenges they face, and exploring new perspectives of creativity.
All with the goal to help fuel a more rich and informed discussion that provides teachers, administrators, and emerging scholars with the information they need to infuse creativity into teaching and learning.
So let's begin. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fueling Creativity in Education podcast. And this is our second debrief of season 10, which means we're about halfway through the season. And around this time, we're also about halfway through the academic year. Now it is a debrief, so we are going to be talking about our past 3 episodes. So Cyndi, why don't you remind us who were our past 3 guests on our show?
Matt, I thought we brought 3 very different interviews to our podcast. And the first one was a double espresso with Jamie Celia Tosi, who is the Director of Education for the National Inventors Hall of Fame, followed by Jaap Haartsen, who was the inventor of Bluetooth. And I don't know about you, but I was a little starstruck during that episode because I just thought that was so cool that we were able to bring him on. And then we had our second episode with Dr. Boaler, who is a professor at Stanford. And then finally, we had a very different perspective from Jonathan Guerra, who is a good friend of mine, someone I've mentored for years, and he is a Buffalo public school teacher. So really hearing about, invention in that first episode and innovation and creativity, and then going into sort of math concepts and how we can teach math more creatively. And then finally with John, really thinking about what does creativity look like inside the classroom and what's stopping teachers from bringing creativity into the classroom. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think we should start with you, but just to follow up on what you said, I think it was very practitioner based. And I know you and I have shared, as we try and cross that bridge between research and practice, it's great hearing about research, creativity research from the sciences and having conversations about how that might apply in education. But it's also wonderful when we kind of get, 3 conversations that are very much practitioner orientated. And of course, Dr. Jo Boaler is a significant researcher from Stanford University, but her work is so much around the practice of mathematics in the classroom. So let's start off with Jaap and Jamie's episode. And I thought it was timely because, of course, we're around Creativity and Innovation Week. So that was a good time. I don't know if we deliberately timed it on that part, but I thought that was well timed. So what was your first takeaway from that episode, Cyndi?
Well, what's really interesting, Matt, is, each week I post on LinkedIn. And if you're not following us on LinkedIn, please do, or connect with us on LinkedIn. But I posted on LinkedIn this idea that creativity is about skills and creativity training. So it's not just enough to teach students creativity, but you also need to give them skills in whatever domain that you're working in. And one of my wonderful colleagues, Julie Shibley, she said, yes, we need those 2 things, but we also need to give them opportunities to be able to do that. And there's so many wonderful opportunities like what Jamie's doing in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. But there's also programs throughout the country and throughout the world that give students these opportunities to create inventions based on problems. And I'll link some of those into the show notes in case you're interested. But if that particular episode intrigued you and you thought, I would love to bring in some level of invention into the classroom, there are so many programs that allow people to do that. So really giving your students that opportunity to be part of something so wonderful.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And to build a little bit on that with opportunities, I thought Jaap, for the most part, took a lot of those questions around the importance of skills. And without those skills, you can't really be creative or inventive. And of course, we're probably talking about the Pro C and Big C level creativity. And we see that within creativity research, that there is a need to have expertise within your domain in order to kind of produce new and useful outcomes for that domain. And so the episode spoke a lot about how you're building on I think Jaap said something on the lines of how we're building on the shoulders of others. And so when he was going about designing Bluetooth, he was talking about, well, what already exists and what do we currently know about the challenge that we're trying to face? And we kind of teach that in our students. I know it's a big part of design thinking as well. But you can teach those skills to your point, But at some point, I like the idea of giving them this opportunity, because at the end of the day, I don't know if this is a good example, but if you imagine a paintbrush, you can have a conversation about how this tool can be used. Really what you need to do is provide them with the opportunity to interact with that paintbrush in a real world environment. You know, it might be that if you're painting a wall and you're doing decorating, you're going to go and apply and perceive that paintbrush very differently than you would if you're working on a canvas. And so there's a need to apply the skills that you're talking about and that you're developing. And I think that also kind of fits a little bit with that competency piece. David Cropley, you know, in our episode way back when, spoke about this idea of creative competencies. And maybe that really is speaking a little bit toward the blend of creativity and skills, the capacity to apply your skill set in a creative way and know how to do that. And the only way I think you can do that successfully is to provide those opportunities. And we're not just talking about, you know, I suppose, well, let me throw it back to you. What type of opportunities are we talking about? Could it be an opportunity that's presented in a 30-minute lesson, or does it have to be something big like some of the projects that we saw Jaap and Jamie talking about?
Well, obviously having big, you know, opportunities is always helpful, but I mean, small opportunities work as well. And even I remember in a conversation we had with Andrea Mango, probably season 6, who was an educator, she had said, you know, in those morning sessions when students are coming in, instead of giving them a worksheet, give them something creative to work on. And I think so even having those small moments inside the classroom where you can bring creativity in or build on those skills in small ways can have a great impact.
Yeah. All right. What was your second takeaway?
Oh, wait, what was your first takeaway?
I think I kind of referenced it. I think it was interesting to get back to that idea of how we're building on previous knowledge. And you know, I think I'd quoted Jonathan Plucker again. We probably overused this quote now, but the idea of creativity is about taking old stuff and putting it together with other old stuff to make new stuff. And, you know, it sounds like when Jaap was kind of recalling his story of Bluetooth, there was a lot of that happening. And that's one of the things that I really liked about that show, is having that opportunity to hear how Bluetooth came about. And when you're listening to how it came about, actually, the process is very similar to some of the conversations that we've had on the show, where teachers and researchers are talking about the importance of design-based education and engaging students in project-based learning. So that was really cool. We spoke a little bit about research as well, and how important it is, again, to conduct design research so that you are in a position to know, you know, what has taken place prior in your domain. And the other thing that I thought that Jaap referenced, and I don't think I'm in a position to quote it, but the suggestion that it's all about small steps, you know, like, so as you're taking old stuff and putting it together with other old stuff to make new stuff, it's not always gigantic leaps. It's these kind of like small steps forward, these small discoveries that you make that you can build upon. And ultimately, you could argue that's all part of the learning experience. So it's almost as if everything we do when it comes to creating and making and inventing new things, it's all about learning. And maybe we come back to the word opportunities. Is this really an opportunity for learning, or is this more about an opportunity to recall and memorize facts that you can regurgitate on a test?
Which really, Matt, brings me to my insight with Joe Boaler, which was all about metacognition, is thinking about thinking. So having those opportunities to learn, and also to build on what you just said, to reflect back and think, okay, so what did I actually do? And what did I learn? And how did I go about it? And what steps did I take? And that's really what keeps shining through in this season, is metacognition, and really teaching students how to think about their thinking and really to reflect, especially with the onset of generative AI and having these rapid moments of having the information right in front of you, to get them to think in more deep and meaningful ways that are relevant to students, so that they can continue to use their brain and continue to learn and build on that knowledge.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, I did this course, we had a couple of courses around the learning sciences when I was doing my doctorate program. And so metacognition was a couple of different modules within that. And, you know, it's not just about assisting us in creativity. Going back to what we said, it's about assisting us in learning. So I think that's a great connection that we're making. And it seems small, but it's, I think, did Joe reference it something along the lines of it's like the little voice inside your head, it's thinking of thinking, but it definitely is, we all do it, and it's something that's active. And likewise, to your point, when you're interacting with generative AI, for example, it's being able to catch yourself to say, wait, I didn't actually think anything about that. I just copied the prompt in and I just copied and pasted the answer. And I never once actually thought about it. Now, it's not that the thinking about it, that's probably more critical thinking, but the cognitive aspect is you catching yourself and saying, I did that wrong. Right. And in essence, it's almost like you're mentoring yourself how you're engaging and thinking about learning. And obviously there's a subcategory, creative metacognition, which is when you're thinking about how original is this? How am I perceiving this as being original? You quite often talk about the idea of perceiving it in different ways, challenging yourself to then go and shift the perspective and say, wait, what about if I perceive it from the perspective of someone in healthcare? Or what about if I perceive it from, that student over in the room? That is that metacognitive process that you're catching yourself, challenging yourself, thinking a different way. And I look back now and I think my inner voice, my pal, who I think at one point I may have even named Annie, whoever it was. Annie? I think so. I think, that voice in our head, right? But the point is, I think it's been a companion all the way through, my time, including catching myself when I'm getting frustrated and recognizing that my frustration is actually stopping me learning. And saying to myself, take a couple of breaths, re-engage, let's engage this strategy. That's my metacognition kicking in. And I think it's something that probably we could do better at teaching students and making them more aware of how they can utilize this as a learning strategy and a strategy to assist in their creative endeavors.
I agree, Matt. And I think what you're talking about is really what Dr. Boaler was really driving home, which is when you're doing math to really talk through your process. And even when you're talking through your process in front of a room of students, if you have a student talking through their process, then the student sees different ways in which other students approach their process in terms of solving problems. And I think it's an interesting way to approach learning, is to have students talking about their process as they go through things, because I'm sure there are some students that just never see things in different ways because they don't see other people's learning preferences. And I'll give you an example of this. I was talking to my kids about this. So have you ever picked up someone's phone and it was someone else's phone and you started scrolling their social media? Have you ever had that happen to you?
I haven't, but I hear you.
Can you imagine? All right. So imagine you pick up my phone and you hit, Twitter or Facebook and you start scrolling through and you go, whoa, what is all this that I'm seeing?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I can. Yep.
It's really seeing the world in a different way. And I think in some ways, when you are talking through what you're learning about, it's sort of the same thing. It's like, let me tell you what I'm seeing. And it could be completely different and it could help people and see things. And it could help them in giving feedback to other students and say, you know what, maybe you want to try doing it this way. And it becomes fun and engaging instead of just like, there's one way to do it and it's only the way that you see doing it, right?
I love it, and I can't help my brain going off and thinking about how that could be really fun, whether it's an experiment, whether it's how to discover. I mean, imagine if you're on a date, and you say, do you mind if I scroll through your social media feed for a couple of minutes? You probably get to learn a lot about that person in that time as well. But then I catch myself thinking that actually we've probably created a situation where some of us might feel that our social media feeds are quite private to us. But right. What a wonderful way of trying to see things from other perspectives. I love that. I love it.
Yeah. So sort of random. And that it actually happened when I was with my mother, because I picked up my mom's phone and I turned on her Facebook and I saw what she was looking at. And some of the things I turned off because I thought she doesn't need to be looking at this. But anyway, tangent. Okay. So let's hear, do you have anything you want to add about Joe? Or
the only thing that I'll add about Joe is that idea of the struggle of learning. It keeps coming up. And I think it's really important to keep talking about it, that I think meaningful learning is a struggle. We've had it in the show a few times. It's something that, as you know, I've shared in a past show that the process, these conversations that we've had around struggle on the show is something that I've worked hard in my classroom, and we can facilitate struggle. But if your students aren't struggling, we spoke about this before, like there's emotion we don't want, but like if you're removing all the struggle in your students, then you probably are removing some opportunities for more in-depth learning to take place. And so Joe was talking about that struggle and how important it is to overcome that struggle. And as we overcome that struggle, we're more likely to value the experience and the outcomes that we produce. And so struggle is important. And that was,
yes.
Yeah, thought I mentioned that.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did also have that in my notes as well around the struggle and making connections and really thinking about math in terms of relevancy and working through those struggles to touch upon that relevancy and meaningfulness that math has in our lives, in our everyday lives, right? So it's not just, math that ends when you finish high school or you go to college, but there's all sorts of ways that we use math in the world. And to be able to understand that and decipher that is essential.
And also that comes back to that opportunities piece as well, right? Because if I look back at, Joe was looking, in essence, she was talking what we said at the very beginning, is to providing opportunities to see and perceive math and interact with math in different ways and to express your knowledge of math in different ways. And it strikes me that, it's probably really easy to just go walk into, a hall in your school and start having a conversations about right angles and doing some calculations about right angles. But we don't. We typically do it on a worksheet or now on a computer program. But, there's probably a lot of opportunities to interact with your math in your building, outside with nature. And without us doing that, we don't get to build those connections that Joe was talking about. And so, maybe one of the challenges that we have in math, and there was obviously conversations around how math is perceived and the challenges that exist in math education, maybe some of it is because there isn't as much opportunity to apply the skills that you're developing within a real world context. Do you want to bring more creative and critical thinking into your school? Look no further than our podcast sponsor, Curiosity to Create.
Curiosity to Create is a nonprofit organization dedicated to engaging professional development for school districts and empowering educators through online courses and personal coaching.
And if you're craving a community of creative educators who love new ideas, don't miss out on their Creative Thinking Network. Get access to monthly webinars, creative lesson plans, and a supportive community, all focused on fostering creativity in the classroom.
To learn more, check out curiositytocreate.org or check out the links in the show notes for this episode. All right, Matt, let's shift over to John Guerra. What was your insight in John Guerra's episode?
Well, I loved the mentorship piece and the idea that we as teachers are also mentors. And I shared that I also feel that a lot, particularly with, in fact, all the way through now, I feel like it's becoming less and less about the content because so much of the content can be accessed in different ways. And it's more about mentoring students about how they're interacting with that content and how they're applying that content, how they perceive that content. And I think that continues to be a really important piece. And I've just finished my latest roundtable around, it was called Riding the First AI Wave. And within that, the film, some of the conversation talks about the more human aspect of learning that can now take place with AI. But I think it's closely related because it's around mentorship. But it was the sleep. We got into this, we got into this conversation about sleep. And, we got to be doing better at sleep. And we've got to, and when I say it's not just the educator, we've got to teach students about the importance of sleep, because I think there is so many things now that can facilitate kids staying up late.
Yeah.
The extra sports events where they then have to come back and rush and do some homework, the social media, the gaming, and then school starts so early. So whether you get to bed at 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, you're still getting up really, really early.
Yeah.
And then this horrible pattern starts brewing. And I'm seeing it with my eldest at the moment, but I've also seen it with my students for the last 10 years. And I did something small and said, do not submit work past 9 p.m. Like, you submit it the next day. There is no advantage about submitting work at 12 a.m., 1 a.m., because that means they're doing it at 10 p.m. at night.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way they are, with everything we've just discussed, there's no way they're engaging the same type of, in my opinion, the same type of metacognition, the same time of critical thinking. They are on autopilot, and they are probably really struggling emotionally with that time. And so sleep. We got to do more. And I think it directly connects not just to learning with creativity. So if you're listening, have you had a conversation with your students about the importance of sleep? And what practices do you have in place to try and promote more sleep? And do you have any practices without you realizing maybe you're accepting the behavior of I'm going to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning because of the fact that you do accept an assignment at 1 o'clock in the morning? And I think in universities, what's even worse is I've caught students, to quote a student from my film, we wear it as a badge of honor, comparing, I only got 2 hours sleep and I only got 4 hours sleep. That's not cool. It's not cool, and we shouldn't be celebrating that.
No.
So that's my takeaway with that one.
I agree. We shouldn't be celebrating sleep, and we shouldn't be celebrating busyness. Ooh,
Yeah.
I hate that word. I hate the word busy. So mine really builds on that, Matt. I think my key takeaway focused more on working with students who are dealing with trauma in their lives. And I was thinking about, how do you build a safe environment? So if we think about, many seasons ago, might have been season 1 or season 2, we had Scott Barry Kaufman on talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how he modified that. But at the core of what our needs are, sleep and safety and psychological safety. And when you're dealing with students who lack sleep and lack psychological safety, it's really hard to build any sort of creativity in, because, they're too tired to really think, and they're too tired or they're too afraid to share because of some sort of trauma that might have happened in their lives. So how do we manage those things? So I thought it was really interesting hearing his perspective of being in the classroom, and John's been in different types of classrooms. And they're just, it's so different. So context, going back to something we've talked about over the seasons, is context matters. And really, when you bring creativity in, are students ready for it in every capacity? Are they ready for it? Are they emotionally ready for, thinking of new ideas? Can they even do that before they've had a good night of sleep, or they've worked through maybe some trauma, or even like building those connections, going back to that mentorship piece? Like, how do we build those connections so students feel safe with us to share when they might not have felt safe in the past?
Yeah, I love that. And I don't know if you remember as well, a lot of what you just shared, and you had said we've spoken about it in the past, but Mohammed Issa's episode in season 1, where he was talking about the teaching of creativity and all the great ideas and wonderful practices that exist in the US, for example, and thinking about how Mohammed might bring that back to Palestine and cultivate and facilitate innovation and creativity in young people there. But a lot of the conversation was around the context and the trauma to which a lot of the young people in Palestine have experienced. That was something that was relevant and, continues to challenge us to think about the context. You're right. Yeah. What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for someone else. And to your point, the same can be applied in the US as well, because there are different communities who have different needs and had different experiences. And some of that is obviously traumatic, and that's going to impact how they not just engage in creativity, but engage in learning. So thanks for bringing that up. And I agree with you. I thought John Guerra did a really good job of sharing his story and his passion as he kind of like what I feel is a lifelong mission to kind of serve that population of students.
Well, Matt, I think this concludes another debrief episode of the Fueling Creativity and Education podcast. If you have any interest in innovation, or you know a math teacher who might benefit from listening to Joe Boaler's episode, forward those on to them and forward on this debrief. And if you have any questions or ideas, we are now building season 11 of the podcast, which will come out in August. And we've got a really exciting Listen and Learn series coming for you. Should we tell them what it is, Matt?
No, we leave it to the end. We've got so many exciting things we've been working on. We should say that I think we're going to be doing a virtual conference at SOU. So we should say we've got some conference stuff that's coming up. But we'll finish the season and we'll do the height in anticipation, you know.
Okay. My name is Dr. Cyndi Burnett.
And my name is Dr. Matthew Worwood.
You've been listening to the Fueling Creativity and Education podcast, hosted by Matthew Worwood and Cyndi Burnett. Our creative producer is Catherine Fu, and this episode was made possible thanks to our sponsor, Curiosity to Create.